Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Fired Up with CJ show. Today we have Anna Choi Pai, who is here to talk about her book, From Manchurian Princess to the American Dream, an anecdotal memoir of two immigrant lives. So, welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So, I want to talk a little bit. As I was saying before we were chatting in the beginning of the show, I'm thrilled to have you on here. Mostly because my own mom, when I ask her these questions about the immigrant experience, doesn't want to talk about it because it's actually a very hard experience that she doesn't want to even talk about the hardships that she went through. And I'm curious, how have you opened yourself into exploring this whole book and writing this book, and what was it like for you?
Well, it was as far as the immigration part of it is concerned. I came over when I was, let's see, for the first time I was 4 years old.
Mm,
And when you're at that age, as long as your parents are with you, it's not a big deal.
mm,
It was much more of a problem for my mother than it was for me because they came away from a way of living that was comfortable. Um, they were respected, and to come to the United States, where at that time, certainly Chinese immigrants were not looked at with great respect.
mhm,
Um, it became a different land. And for me, it was my homeland
mm.
because I didn't know anything else.
And did you have brothers and sisters that immigrated with you?
I have two older brothers,
And how old
and
were they when you guys immigrated?
well, if I was 4 years old, my older brother would be six, close to six
Mm,
anyway, and my old oldest brother would be like eight,
oh
8 or 9 years old.
and so did they have a very similar kind of experience of like, it's not a big deal. We almost relate more to being American than Chinese or
Well, for me, that's
Manchurian.
and my brothers too. That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
You know, we
Okay.
came at an age when it wasn't hard to pick up the language, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
and listening to the radio uh, and all that. It was and meeting young people near where we lived, and certainly when we went to school,
Mm-hmm.
it was not a problem. It was not a problem, but
My
it certainly was for my mother.
Yeah, my mom immigrated when she was in her 20s. So her family moved from um, mainland China. Their house, they were similar to your family, came from a very affluent background. They
Mm-hmm.
bought like five or six different homes, each of which got taken away from them. They
Yes,
eventually
sure,
moved to Hong Kong,
sure.
Brazil, India, and then eventually my parents went to school in the United States, like
Mm-hmm.
yourself.
Uh-huh.
And but they came in they were here in their 20s, and so it was a very different kind of experience. How old was your mom when she moved over here?
Let's see. I'm not real sure how old she was. My brother had to be, let me see, if I was he would have been around 9 years old. Yeah, she would be in her 20s.
Yeah,
But
and it's
yeah,
yeah, that's interesting because my mom
I
had
think.
a much harder time. There was a lot more prejudice of what she had to face as
Mm,
an incoming student, and all these language barriers. Luckily, she
yes.
went on to an American-speaking private school in China, so it was much
Uh-huh.
easier for her to make the transition. But what was it like? You said that your mom not had to leave a lifestyle that was comfortable and where she was respected to a place in which she was like had none of that. She was,
Yes, she was an ordinary person.
yeah.
And as I've said in my book, being ordinary was not tolerable.
Oh,
as far as she was concerned. Oh, having to learn to cook. What? She had to learn how to cook. Oh, yeah. She had never, actually never seen the inside of a kitchen.
oh,
She had not just one cook. She had multiple cooks
yeah, yeah.
and multiple kitchens. She remembers that she had a kitchen that specialized in Western cuisine. And
Wow.
for them, that was something, a great, of the great interest. And whenever she wanted to, at any time of the day or night, regardless of what she wanted, she got it.
Mm,
All she had to do was call the kitchen and say, I want this such and such.
mm,
And it depended on which kitchen she was calling. And she would have whatever she needed. So when she came, she had all of a sudden to learn how to cook.
mm,
And the first parts of it, I'm pretty sure, were because we had brought a Chinese ama, a maid,
mm-hmm,
with us who cooked.
mm.
And she would cook at that time. And then before long, however, she was stolen by other Chinese immigrants. They paid her more than
Oh,
my parents did. And all of a sudden, our cook disappeared. And my mother truly had to figure out how things were cooked because my father wouldn't eat American food.
oh my goodness. You know, I actually have my mother also was raised by maids, and so she really did not know how to cook,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
so to this day sort of still doesn't know how to cook, and then sadly pass that along to me, which also doesn't know. I can read. I'm like, I can read a book at least, and I'll read a cookbook and try to follow things. I don't know how to cook Chinese. In fact, she one time was teaching me how to cook. I said, Mom, will you just at least teach me how to cook a couple of Chinese dishes? And she had like shrimp with snow peas and beef with broccoli and like
Mhm,
some other
mhm,
dish.
mhm.
And she said, okay, first what you do is get the pan really hot. Then you throw in the beef and mix it with the sesame oil. Then you actually take the vegetables and then
Uh-huh.
saute them. Okay, so I was
Yeah.
like, okay. I was like, okay, that didn't seem that hard. And then she brought and she's like, okay, let's do the beef with broccoli. And then she's like, first you heat up the pan with oil and garlic. Then you throw in the beef, and then you throw in the vegetables. And I thought, okay, you don't even have to tell me the third dish, and how to do it, because I think I had the formula. That was the only cooking lesson I ever got my entire life. And she's like, "What do you want from me? This is how you do it. This is all I know. I'll pass on what I know." And that was all she knew. So, how did you
Well,
learn how to? Do you know how to cook then?
I do. I do. And my mother turned out to be a very good cook. It
Okay.
was amazing. And I think for her, it was important because she sort of felt like um, she was a little bit useless because she couldn't drive.
Mm,
She didn't, she wasn't in a position to really learn English,
mm.
so she couldn't get a job.
Oh.
And not understanding what goes on in American culture, she just felt like she was isolated.
Mm,
Whereas my father had his job. He spoke English well enough that he became an interpreter, a simultaneous interpreter at the United Nations.
wow.
And there, my mother couldn't drive. She really had nothing to teach the children. What was she going to tell me? How to do what? You know.
Yeah.
So the experience was a whole lot different, and she had not ever been to a school. She was schooled at home.
Oh, wow. That's very different. Wow, that's
Very
interesting.
different. She was schooled at home, and my father not only was schooled at home, he went to a Chinese school, university, so that when he came over here, learning in an American institution was not difficult for him, but it was totally difficult for my
Mm.
mother. Yeah.
Right. It sounds very similar to my grandmother, who she moved from China to Japan. And in Japan, it's a very similar kind of scenario where you have people waiting on your hand and foot, and you're kind
Yes.
of like,
Yes.
you have like an
Right.
ambassador status all the time when you work in a
Right.
corporation in
Mm-hmm.
Japan. And then she moved to the United States where she was like the Jackie O of this, like, in her mind and also in her behavior. Like, she was always exquisitely dressed, and like her jewelry or earrings
Yes.
matched her shoe, like everything
Yes.
matched. She was always, her
Yes.
hair was perfectly coiffed. She had, like, I don't even know how many scads of silverware and plates and
Oh
entertaining,
my
like
goodness.
just
Yes.
like party after party.
Yeah.
And then she came to the United States where there were no elaborate parties where everyone cooked like, 50 dishes. It was just her
That's right.
with all
That's
her
right.
elaborate outfits. And she couldn't speak English really well, nor
Right.
did she want to try. She
Mm-hmm.
had a very similar kind of upbringing where she didn't really, but it was very, very hard. And she didn't have desire to learn, and she couldn't drive, and she didn't have opportunities. And I never thought about how hard that must have been for her. I
Yes.
I never
Yes.
thought about that from your mom's perspective. That must be very hard. But then
Yes.
here's what I always wondered. Okay, from a granddaughter perspective, I thought, well, why can't you
Mm-hmm.
just go learn English? Like, go take a class. Like, can't you do that? I mean, talk to your neighbor and try to learn English. What?
Yeah.
I don't understand it. So when you think about your mom, why could she have, or how could I feel compassion for my grandma, which I don't, frankly, as a
Yes.
grandchild, and I probably should.
Yeah. Well, the a situation where she was to be the student and learning from someone whose expertise was whatever she was to be taught was a totally different experience for her.
Mm,
And the only time that that really happened was when she actually did sign up to take an English lesson
mm,
for my father had gotten a job at the United Nations as a simultaneous interpreter at a time when my parents had used up all the money that they had brought
mm,
from China. And at that point, the family was no longer there to support them because the communists had taken over.
mhm,
So they lost everything. I mean, absolutely everything.
mm,
Um, and so she tried to take uh, lessons at the United Nations, where my father actually got a job as an interpreter. But she didn't do well because she had never experienced what learning was in the United States, a classroom where
mm,
there's a teacher and you sit there and you listen to them. The only teaching she knew was with uh, a personal interpreter, if you would, somebody who would come and try and talk to them and all that. But that didn't last long, and they didn't have the money then
mm,
to
mm,
be able to hire someone.
mm,
So what she ended up having to deal with is a husband, and I'm now that I am grown up and think about it. My father was
mm,
an exceptionally bright man, and he became so good in English that he was the first interpreter for the nascent United Nations
mm,
for Chinese to English and English to Chinese.
mm.
Okay, the latter of which is probably easier than from Chinese to English.
Hmm.
Um, so he was able to do that, whereas she could not, just on her own, even
Wow.
um, learn the language with a teacher, someone to help
And
her
your
out.
dad didn't want to necessarily coach her or teach her.
No, he was not patient. He was not a patient man. And this was something, as I said in my book, that I tried to chastise him sometimes because he would actually, I think, psychologically diminish my mother
Mm,
by saying, she was too stupid, essentially saying she was too stupid to learn the language
no.
and stay out of my business kind of thing.
Mm.
Um,
And did
and
your brothers and you help to, because sometimes when this happens in the United, it's very common for immigrant families to come and
yeah,
then rely on their children to teach them. Did you guys help
that's
try to
right.
teach her
We
too?
we tried. We tried, but the Chinese family, we were raised in the classical Chinese family way, which is you don't you don't say anything negative about anything that your parents do.
Hmm.
I remember my father saying something to me. There's a Chinese saying that parents can't do anything wrong under the sun.
Hmm.
So it was difficult, but we tried, and it didn't really work. And he did not help her be a successful immigrant to the United States.
Mm,
All she heard from him was, you don't know, you can't know, you're
mm,
not able to learn."
mm.
So
It brings back so many. When I listen to that, I think about so many immigrants from different countries that have a
mhm,
very similar male patriarchal kind of society
yes,
where
yes,
women
yes,
aren't are supposed to be diminished or not supposed to know. And so
yes,
I can see this being, it's not just a Chinese American or story, it's an immigrant experience between wife and husband that could happen, right? And everyone, you know, you hear people immigrating, there are like lawyers, doctors, professional people in their former country, and then they come to the United States and have to start, just like my parents did, have to start completely all over again
that's
without,
right.
and I can't even imagine what a crush it may be on your ego. Like you're saying, like it was really hard for your mom who was in this
Yeah.
place of being respected all the time.
Well, this is the reason why she, as a mother, just insisted that I continue with my education after I graduated from college.
Mm,
And she would say to me when we were alone, you cannot you cannot be in a situation where you're dependent entirely on a man, because she was entirely dependent on my father.
I literally got that same message as
Did you
this next
really?
generation. Yeah, my mom said to
Well,
me, she said to me the same, literally the same thing. She said, "You need to be," and I think it's my mom was very independent as a woman for
mhm,
her generation, and she said, "You never want to be dependent on a man. You
that's
always want to."
exactly the words.
Exactly.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, that we are two completely different. I'm 55. You're 80. How
I'm
I'm
85.
85. So 30-year spanning, and we got the
Yeah,
same
same message.
exact message.
Absolutely.
And I think it was because of this in the Eastern world, like you are diminished, you don't have any opportunity. So now that you're here in the United States, where there's a different set, presumably a different set of dynamics, arguably way better than they were at the time that my mom was younger, and then and when you were also younger. Um, so how did that affect you? So how does that those words, so her experience then shaped you into really focusing and you then got you had a bachelor's degree in zoology from Sweetbriar College, a master's degree in embryology in Bryn Mawr College, and a PhD in genetics from Albert Einstein College of Medicine. So, like, you really took what you said to heart.
Just sort of went overboard a little bit, I guess. Yeah. Well, but as it turns out, the I had educators that sort of understood, I think, and pushed me, you know, they, that I should not stop at just going to college. They pushed me to go on for graduate work. Without them, I certainly wouldn't. I would have been very happy. The only thing I could think of myself was as a uh, laboratory assistant. You know, I'm capable of washing test tubes. You know, and I thought that that would be what I would end up doing. But my professors told me, no, you can't just stop here.
What a
You go
gift.
on to something else. They, my major professor at Sweetbriar College, a women's college that probably made a difference, um, made sure that I knew that there were programs during the summertime
Mm,
that would continue my education
mm,
and that I should not spend the summer as I did a couple of summers um, working at a 10-cent store or
mm,
something like that,
mm,
but that I should go to programs that existed, which I as a student would not know about, that they as educators would know.
mm,
That, for example, up at in Bar Harbor, Maine, there was a laboratory that had a summer program to teach students how to do research,
mm-hmm,
real research. You worked with the staff scientists at the laboratory on a particular um, problem, and so I was pushed that way by my major professor.
mm.
Had she not done that, I wouldn't have had any idea. And I would have been very happy being probably just a lab assistant washing test tubes because I didn't know any different.
And what's amazing about that experience is that, at least with my mom's experience at University of Michigan, I mean, they don't, at that time when you were going to college, there weren't a lot of Asians taking coursework, and
Mhm.
probably people, it's unclear whether people even at that time held you in high regard, right? It could be like, oh, some, I'm thinking about, well, my mom, like, she spoke English, okay, enough to take classes at University of
Hmm.
Michigan, but like,
Oh, wow, yeah.
yeah, and then my dad took classes at University of Pennsylvania. He got a grad degree. My mom eventually got a master's in mathematics and computer science. This is like
Wow,
during your time when it was, everything was
fantastic,
done
yeah.
like punch cards. Um, but it
Yes.
was a very atypical thing, and I often wonder, like, how did they even know to do, like, what my parents were told by their parents was, you need to go to the United States. You need to get
Mhm.
an education. That is the only way that you can, like, take from where you are to where you need to go. And you
But
need
that was
something
said to your
technical.
mother as well as your father.
My mother, my father, my uncles, my aunts, they were all, and they're all your age. They were told you need to have one, a technical profession, because your English is not great.
Mhm.
The language that you speak is technical. Engineering, mathematics.
Now,
That's a
what
common language.
what good advice? My parents just never had that kind of advice. They always thought that as long as we have money, we'll be okay. We'll buy our way through the United States. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden, they used up all the money. And what happened? They didn't know where to go, what to do. Fortunately, again, my father's language was good enough that, and his Chinese was superb. I
Mm,
mean, he had a classical Chinese upbringing.
mm,
And this is again was something that my mother did not have, and my father just simply didn't think she was capable of it.
Yeah, I just find what's fascinating is what you assume your life is about is what every other Chinese person's life is about, right? But it's not. Like what my grandmother had was very similar to your mom's experience. What
Yes,
my
yes,
mom and dad's experience were is very similar to your experience. I mean,
right.
it's
That's
just,
right.
I mean,
That's
it's
right.
just so interesting, I think. And so if you now go down to the next generation and your children
Yes,
who are probably the same age as me, um, what did how did
that's
all
right.
this stuff like kind of move from generation to generation? So now there's this idea about school. You've had this tremendous experience and gifts from,
Hmm.
special people in your life that led you.
Hmm.
How did that shape
Hmm.
your children and now subsequently your grandchildren?
Yes. Well, um, for me, it was my parents never put any pressure on me or uh, said to me that they had any expectations for me. It was all their pressure was always on my oldest brother.
I'm laughing because exactly the same thing happened to me.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so you understand completely what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
He was to be the one to lead the family,
Hmm.
and he was good. I mean, my oldest brother, I really adored him, and um, he became a medical doctor. He was given three areas to study in college by my parents. One was engineering. You, you, I'm sure understand. Medicine was another one, and there was a third one. I can't remember what it is at the present time. So, huh? Agriculture. That's right. Agriculture. To them, these three areas were respectable things for boys to do.
Yeah.
For me, they never talked to me about anything. They never asked me what kind of school I wanted to go to or what I wanted to do. It was all on my own. And fortunately for me, I had the faculty take that part of parenting for me.
Mm, that,
And
that,
I was and that was because just by accident I happened to enroll in a small women's college.
mm, yeah, who knows? If you hadn't been at Sweetbriar, who knows what would have happened?
I would have ended up washing test tubes.
We don't know that, but still, who knows? I sort of doubt that, but who knows? It's funny because I had literally the same experience, and so my mom was a tiger mom, the traditional tiger mom
Oh yes,
that
yes,
people talk about. This
yeah.
was my mom to my brother, so he played the
Right,
violin.
exactly.
I mean, it's almost like a script out of some bad movie about an Asian, right? He played violin. He played he played piano really well.
My brother played the piano. I had to play, and my brother played the violin. I had to play the piano, and my poor um, uh, middle brother ended up having to try to play the cello, and he was left-handed. And there was this thought in my mother's mind that I would wear a great bouffant dress, playing the harp or the piano or something, and with my oldest brother playing the violin, and my middle brother playing the cello or something, and we would give
Have a little
concerts.
concert.
Absolutely.
Okay, my mom basically my brother played so he had all these things, and then he went to Yale, he went to Harvard Business School, and so they were pushing, and they
Yes.
pushed him all the
Yes.
way to all these different things. And then at a
Absolutely.
certain point there's enough pushing that like the acceleration just happens on your own. But for
Yes.
me it was like, so community college, whatever you want to do. You want to go to college, whatever you want to
That's
do
right.
is fine with us. And
Uh-huh.
it actually was my dad who's like, I do think that maybe you should look at a good school. And so it was my dad actually who, but
Yeah,
from my mother's perspective, because girls are considered so secondary in the whole equation,
right,
like
right.
it's like no, your role will come later when, like my aunt, you will take care of your father and your mother by bathing, cleaning, taking care of them,
Mm,
and
hmm.
otherwise being like
Yes,
helpful. This is how
yes.
you are value and helpful. Otherwise, just hang around until you that time comes. That was at least my message. I don't know if that happened, if that was your family. I'm trying to figure out, is this just a Chinese thing or what?
All I remember of what my father thought of the developments in my life uh, in the area of education was that in graduate school, I was working with fruit flies because I was a geneticist. Okay. And they never asked what I did, ever. And when they found out, I forget what it was at one point when he overheard that I was doing research with fruit flies. And his comment was, "What?" We were working with fruit flies and without the language to explain to him, what I was doing, what genetics was, the language of science that I only learned in English. There was no way I could explain to him what I was doing and why I was doing it. It was
Wow.
just really strange. My my daughter's working with fruit flies. It was just something that they couldn't understand and it didn't bother them
Yeah.
because they didn't expect anything of me anyway.
Yeah. They're like, what are you doing? Training those flies for a circus? What is it that you're doing, Anna? Like it probably, luckily my family, uh, actually, once they realized I had some potential, um,
Hmm.
so I went to Duke, which was not as great as Yale. Like I had this kind of like all this secondary kind
Yay,
of thing that
yay,
I
Duke.
like.
We're a Dookie family.
You are?
Yeah.
Oh, yay! Okay. So I went to Duke and class of 85. So I went to Duke and um, that
Class of 85. What year were you? My oldest son and his wife were class of 83
oh, I may
at
know
Duke.
them.
You
Uh,
probably did.
What year were we? 87. We were 87.
Oh, class of
We were
87.
87.
oh, they're
Sorry.
younger
Class
than
of
me.
87. Yeah,
Um,
but
so
barely.
yeah,
Oh,
so that was me. So I went to Duke and afterwards my parents said, "Okay, now that you're okay, if you're gonna like decide to go it on your own, because
Mhm,
clearly you're not gonna get married, you.
mhm.
However,
That's
you
right.
can't hope that you'll just get married and get it over with. You'll
Yeah.
have to get a career and do all this such." So they said, "Just go into finance, do something safe."
Mm,
You know, and
mhm,
it was just like my mom and dad, where you're forced into a career that you didn't really even like, right? Like
mhm.
I bet,
Yes.
like I did not like playing piano. I did not like any of the things that my parents asked me to do, but I did it because they told me to do it. Because I'm not sure what it is in the Chinese genetics that you just do what your parents tell you,
Oh,
irrespective.
you're brainwashed into that from the time you could talk.
Yeah, but we just do it. I mean, I just did it.
That yeah, you had to. It was just part of it.
Yeah. So
Part of being a Chinese daughter.
yeah, so I just did what they
Yeah,
told me. I went
yeah.
into finance. Did I like it? No. But then so it's lucky that in fact they didn't know what you were all about, and they didn't care, because then you could pursue your passions in
Yeah,
kind of this free way,
right,
I
right.
think.
Well, my brother was given three areas to study, as I mentioned before, in college. So he majored in political science.
Oh, your parents must have had a fit with that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, they were very disappointed. And then afterwards, of course, when he graduated from Cornell, he was drafted into the
Mm,
army, and he thought about it a little bit and decided, well, maybe they were right. What am I going to do as a he wasn't even a citizen at that point. We weren't
mm.
citizens until much later. And what was he going to do as a non-citizen in, you know, political science? It just wasn't going to work. So that's when he decided, well, of all the things they talked about, he liked medicine the best.
So he became a doctor.
So he became a doctor. He was one of the oldest doctors Columbia University ever graduated because
Wow.
he had to take all these required courses, which he never had as a political science major. And fortunately, he met and married a lovely Chinese woman who was understanding and supported him until he could get all of the required courses that allowed him to go into medical school.
Wow. Does he have any regrets about being, kind of like steered in a direction that his parents wanted, but not necessarily his poli sci person wanted?
No, no, I think that he got caught up in the study of medicine
Hmm.
and uh, became a well-known um, OBGYN and made my parents very proud because they could brag about him. He was
Oh, yeah. And you
known.
need bragging rights.
Oh my goodness, that was the case. And you know, she was known for her beauty as a young woman, she said, and everybody respected her. They knew who I was, and she brought that to this country, and it created a little bit of problem between us
Mm.
because I thought to myself, who cares what you you are?
Yeah, that's a little bit of a
You know,
problem.
the American way of looking at things. Um, you were what you did. Um, well, anyway, it's
Oh
too
no, I
complicated
get I
for
no I
that.
get it because as a Chinese, for someone who's a first generation Chinese my parents who are from mainland China, there is kind of a here's how you're supposed to operate. You're supposed to be respectful. You're supposed to have a huge, ample amount of humility. You're supposed to just work industriously.
That's right.
These are just kind of very classic, Chinese classic. These are
Yes,
the values, right?
absolutely.
Then
Yeah,
you come to the United States, like you got to fend for yourself. You need to like push the other guy. Like you have
yeah,
to be big and boisterous, or otherwise you're just going to be shoved off to the side. Like
that's
I
right.
mean, these values are very counter to each other. And as someone like yourself and myself who has to navigate these two sets of in some ways, the only thing that is common is hard work. Um,
Yes,
but the rest of it is like pretty
that's right.
different. And
Yeah,
navigating
yeah,
those two things um, was extremely difficult for me. I don't know what it
yeah.
was like for you.
Oh, it was difficult because it wasn't so much that I didn't want to do what they told me to do. They never told me anything.
Right.
And so I had to find my own way.
Mm.
And that was difficult. I mean, the only thing that they really were interested in terms of what I did, was my social life with the Chinese boys.
Of course, as they wanted
Yeah,
to marry you off. Oh my
exactly.
God.
Exactly.
Oh my
You know,
God.
after going to college, for example, um, our longest vacation was around Christmas and New Year's. And I would be lined up with the sons of my parents' friends every night of a 2-week vacation. with
Oh
different
my
boys.
goodness. Oh my goodness. That's a lot.
That's a lot,
And
a
did you
lot.
ever marry, did you eventually marry one of these gentlemen that
No,
you had met? Not any single one.
no,
Okay,
no.
who's your husband? How did you eventually meet your husband?
I met my husband, I think, thanks to my roommate at Sweetbriar, because she saw that I was not dating boys. And I told her that one of the reasons is my parents didn't want me to date American boys.
Hmm.
And I didn't know anybody to call, to get together with. So I on weekends I tended to just stay at the college and not go out. And my roommate decided she wasn't going to let me just sort of wither away and arranged for a mixer
Hmm.
of foreign students.
Oh,
And
wow.
I said,
Good roommate. Wow.
"Oh, wonderful roommate." And I said to her, "That's a wonderful idea." She was head of the YWCA on campus. And I said, "That's a wonderful idea, but I'm not going." I didn't. I hated the kind of situation where, and this may have been because we were an all women's college in those days, um, that we were supposed to start mixers and have parties where we would invite boys from other schools to come and look us over and dance or whatever it was. And I hated that. I really
Hmm.
just hated that kind of situation. And so when she said, "Well, I'm going to make a mixer, arrange a mixer with all foreign students," and they're not just going to be American boys. So, and she said, "You're my roommate, and you're going to go to this mixer." So I did, and I met my future husband there.
Thank goodness
He
for
was a
your
bien
roommate.
mine. Yeah,
Wow. Where was he at college?
Virginia Military Institute. It was about 30 miles away from Sweetbriar.
Right. Like, what's the likelihood you would have met him? Probably not
No,
likely. You know,
no,
wow.
not likely. I was dating other Chinese boys. So,
Wow.
um, but he
And
was
and I'm
he
just
was
curious that when you were dating other Chinese boys, here's my mom and dad's experience. I don't know whether this is yours because I'm just doing a comparative analysis at this
okay.
point. My mom and dad were fixed up with other people from their same village. You know, they were in Shanghai
Oh,
and they
hmm,
would and there was so, it's there it's like you would only want to be dating. I mean, there was all these filters. Must be Chinese, then also must be Chinese from the same village so that they're same caliber or status or whatever
yes,
before you even date them. So there was all these kind of filtering. Was that
yes,
when your mom was
absolutely.
doing your
Yeah.
arranged marriage or arranged? I mean, it's kind of like
Yes,
an arranged marriage, right? They were kind of
sure,
matchmaking you.
sure.
Was she doing it on this kind of same criteria?
Well, not so much from the village point of view because they were in such a high stratum of
Right.
society
Yeah.
that it was sort of beneath them,
Right.
that kind of thing. Um, and well, it just uh,
So what
it
was her
was
matchmaking criteria? Also works with fruit flies? Like what was the
no, she couldn't have cared less what I was studying or doing. Um, it, the person had to be Chinese man, and with some either the three criteria for my brother: agriculture, engineering, or medicine. If the boys were in any of these, oh, they're a catch. And why don't you go after them? Kind of thing. So, It was not easy because at the time that I grew up to be at a dating age, there weren't that many Chinese young people available. There just weren't.
Yeah. It's law of numbers, not a lot. I
That's
mean,
right.
honestly, I'm laughing because my grandfather, he always wore a suit. Even when he was like 85, he would wake up, wear white button shirt, wear a tie and wear a suit.
Yeah, yeah.
Nowhere to go, sitting in his living room. He wore a suit every single day. Till I don't even know. He may have been died in a suit. I honestly don't know. But even though he's retired, every day he wore a suit.
Yeah.
And he typed. So he touch typed this mess, and he actually, in the old days, they would have a piece of paper, and then they would have like the mimeograph. They didn't have copies. They had like a blue piece of paper that would
Mm-hmm.
make a
Mm-hmm.
copy of the second thing. So he
Yes.
sent me,
Right. Yeah,
he
I
typed a note.
remember
I
those.
got the mimeograph version. So I don't know if he had several versions of these letters he was floating around, but one would presume so. So he sent me this letter on here are the criteria. It's now that you are coming of age. I graduated from college. He said, now that you're
Okay.
coming of age, I would like you to know the criteria of a man who would be suitable for you to marry. Must be Chinese. Must be someone who's in the medical profession or an engineer or mathematician. I kid you not. And he said, and whatever you do not get involved with someone in sales or an actor or something frivolous.
Oh, that's so funny.
and I
That's so
and he said
funny.
he must be serious. He must be kind. So then there was like a set of serious, kind, hard-working. Um, but it's funny. I mean, I literally got the same
Yeah.
letter as you. I
Yes.
mean, it's same kind
Yeah.
of messaging 30 years
Yes.
later.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
and here's the thing that I think is fascinating is I'm wondering because now I have kids and you have grandkids,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
when you think about your kids and you think about the way that you were raised and then what you did with your children and now what they're
Mm-hmm.
passing to their grandchildren,
Mm-hmm.
what are the values that you see continue generation from generation in terms of work, school?
Well, I think there's a whole lot of the Chinese um, way of thinking that still is being transmitted because I'm Chinese and I was brought up with these ideas that we want to pass down to our children's children, and it works. It works. I think about my my sons, and they followed the ideas that I grew up in, and I didn't even know. This is a story that I've often thought about as being fascinating to me because I don't understand it. But one of the things that I had decided on when I had children, that as they grew, if they wanted to go out with any kind of person, um, I would be happy. I would not say to them, you can only go out with Chinese people. Um, and it was okay if you got interested in a serious way with someone who was not Chinese. It was as far as I was concerned. This is what I thought I I was teaching my boys, but it wasn't. It
Really?
wasn't really. Uh, my older son went to Duke, and when he was a freshman, he met a girl that he was really interested in. And like a good son, When we were talking one day, I guess I asked him, how are you doing on the social front? And he told me that he had met a classmate that he thought was really very nice and interesting. She was smart, and he was getting interested in her in a serious way. And I said to him, "Well, that's wonderful. Um, by the way, it doesn't matter one way or another to me. Is she Chinese or is she American?" And to my great astonishment, he said, "She's an American." And then he apologized in Chinese.
Oh,
Yeah. And I thought, what? Why would, what? Why are you apologizing?
wow.
And he ended up marrying her, and she's sitting across the table from me right now.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So
Isn't it funny?
it
So
was okay, but it was funny that he said, "I'm sorry." He's in Chinese, 对不起,对不起.
yeah, wow. My brother was my father was the eldest son of my two brothers and one sister. So he was the eldest son. When he got married to my mom, he had the first boy of the Lu generation.
Mhm.
And then when he was looking around, he graduated from Harvard Business School, was looking around. Um, my my grandfather said to him, "Okay, marry a Chinese girl. That's okay." And so and and because there was just so much pride in being Chinese,
Yes.
and he said, um, "Chinese, okay, if you can't marry Chinese, then like, or at least Asian, you know, Japanese, Korean, something." So to his like slight disappointment, he married someone Korean, right? Because it was like at that time it was just like it had to be Chinese. So anything less than that was like, okay, still good. All right, then then his his children proceeded to marry white person after like from then on we all married white people.
That's right.
I married a white guy. But the
Yes.
other two boys married a white guy. The two girls married white guys, white women, white guys. I mean, it was hilarious. And then, like after the first, he was kind of bemoaning. The next was like, okay, so maybe the person's going to be white. And he was like hemming and hawing, and then like after like one after another in succession, we began marrying white people. It's just thought, oh, I give up. It's funny. It is funny though that it really feels like you and I have led parallel lives, even though they're separated by
Oh
30
my goodness,
years.
yes. Yes,
I'm
yeah,
just astounded. So,
yeah.
so
It,
how
it
about you,
must be
Grinch?
it must be the strength of the Chinese culture, don't you think?
Here's the thing that's amazing to me that when you said that you didn't. I, I'm Chinese American. My husband is more Chinese than me. Honestly, he's of he has a mixed descent, but he's a Jewish. Jewish Chinese are like classic pairing. It's just like peanut butter and chocolate. We go together because they have similar values of education, hard work, whatever. So I've got a peanut butter and chocolate. There we go, peanut butter and jelly, whatever you want to call it. And my kids, when I was younger, we used to say, okay, is she more Chinese or more American? Because you could
Yes,
literally go
yeah,
down each
yes,
person and go, more Chinese, more
sure.
American, more
Yeah,
Chinese, more
yeah,
American. And I
yeah,
was like the more
yeah.
American one, right? So, and my brother is the more Chinese one. So he, married, a Korean woman, and I'm like the more
Yes.
American woman. I married this white Jewish guy, and
Yeah.
then, and then our kids are completely Chinese. And it astounds me because I really, I'm not a tiger mom.
Hmm.
I don't. think I have I mean, I have like hard work, respecting other, respecting elders,
Hmm.
respecting yourself. Like respect is a big thing. That is a Chinese
Sure.
humility, not being
Hmm.
arrogant in your ways, working hard. Like these are things that
Hmm.
I embody, my husband embody,
Hmm.
and our
Hmm.
children embody, and they're more
Hmm.
Chinese than I am. And they're actually dating Chinese people, which is just blows my
Interesting.
mind.
My goodness. Yes, that is interesting. That's very unusual.
Yeah, how
Really.
about for your grandchildren? What are you experiencing with your own grandchildren?
Well, uh, um, there's no feeling that they need to be involved only with Chinese people, Chinese Americans. There's no such feeling at all, and uh, my daughter-in-law is grinning at me.
She's showing me pictures of their wedding.
Yes, my she's showing me pictures of her children who are marrying Americans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Yeah, and I don't really know what our children will be doing, but they were both. I will live in Seattle, and even though you think it's a very integrated, open, whatever, they're very, and there's a large Chinese population. Where my
Yes, there
children
is.
went to school,
Yes.
there was not a
Uh-huh.
large Chinese population, so they were raised as whites. Does that make
Hmm.
sense? Like they had
Yes.
like two
Yes, I
other Asian
understand.
kids in their school, which is how I was raised, two other Asian kids in the school. And so I kind of associate it more with being more American than more
Yes.
Chinese.
Yes.
And they don't hang out with American friends, but they date Chinese girls. It's just it's a
Oh,
bizarre scenario.
yes.
So I just
Yeah.
find this whole thing where you
That's
feel
very
like you're
interesting.
like I feel myself I'm American, but then my kids are more Chinese. They're more Chinese than
Really?
I am. Yeah.
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 No, I don't have that experience. My kids are very happy with Americans.
Yeah. No.
They both my sons married American women, and I couldn't ask for better. Just don't let it get to your head. My daughter-in-law is sitting there, sort of gloating. I couldn't
Well,
have asked for better
Do they
daughters-in-law,
have Chinese
really.
values, do you think, still?
Very much.
It's
I think so.
interesting.
I think so. Yeah.
well, and then you have Leanna with BG with her husband, and then Keith with his soon-to-be wife.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
The grandchildren, yeah, are marrying Americans.
Yeah, and it will be interesting to see what the next generation is like. Do you go
Yeah.
completely, so like I went opposite my parents and
Yeah.
then my kids went opposite to me and then maybe it
That's
will
right.
swing back.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
it's
Yes.
it's all about, as you know from Chinese kind of belief, a harmony, right? It's like
Yes.
if there's one generation
That's
like
right.
this and the other generation is like that and the other generation is like this.
Yes.
Um, I This has been such a pleasure and connecting with you to hear about your
Oh, I've
experience.
loved it. I've loved the experience. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
And
you so much.
you're very welcome. And I hope to run across you again
Uh,
sometime.
well, my son goes to school in North Carolina because you're in North Carolina now, right?
I'm in North Carolina.
Are you in Chapel
Exactly.
Hill or that evil place Chapel
No,
Hill or in Durham?
no, in neither of them. I'm in Davidson.
Ah, Davidson. Okay, you're neutral territory.
We will visit Durham. We're not going to the light blue place.
Yes, both my older son uh, and his wife are Dukies.
I love it.
So,
I love it. All right, it has been such a pleasure. I feel like
oh, for me
I
too.
found a new auntie. You're my new adopted auntie.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank
Thank
you.
you.
We've been talking to
Appreciate it.
from Manchurian Princess to American Dream, an anecdotal memoir of two immigrant lives. We've been talking about, I don't know, six immigrant lives at this point. I don't even know. But
Thank
thank
you.
you so much. Thank you.
Very welcome.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show and would love your support in any way by giving me comments below or to subscribe to the show or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.